Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
I think the core set of problems that I've been trying to solve have been pretty much there from the start. It's how to make the sheet music look as good as possible, turn as quickly as possible, how to annotate as naturally as possible. Those are kind of the three big ones, and everything since then has just gotten me closer to where I want to be with that. Like, again, Apple Pencil, the way it interacts, the number of ways I've been able to tie that into forScore are incredible. You can now just write on the page, and it just like there used to be annotation mode. You'd have to enter annotation mode, then you can start drawing, then you have to save your work. Now it's basically transparent. You could just draw, and when you're done, it's done. There's still this little bit of friction. I need to be able to work quickly, and everything I do basically attempts to get closer and closer to that, and I think we've pretty much gotten there, which is fantastic.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. This episode is long overdue. You'll be hearing from Justin Bianco, the creator of the popular sheet music reading app forScore. He just rolled out version 14, and we will be diving into this new version, as well as the app in general. This app is now 13 years old and has been steadily updated year after year, and is one of the truly great iPad first apps, and remember using it back in 2010 and 11 when it was first introduced. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing to the podcast in Apple Podcasts. Every dollar goes a long way and is greatly, greatly appreciated. Support the podcast for as little as $1 a month over at patreon.com/iPadPros. With that, here's my interview with Justin. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And congrats on forScore version 14. Kind of crazy. It's version 14 at this point.
Yeah. It's been, 13 years now?
Yeah. So before we dive into forScore, what's your background like? I'm always curious about that. Are you a musician yourself? And kind of what was the iPad to you when it came out? And was this kind of a revelation that you could combine sheet music with maybe a love you have of music?
Yeah, so I've played piano basically my whole life as soon as I was old enough to reach the keys, my mother says. So always been interested in music, always really interested in classical music. I play mostly by ear. I learned using the Suzuki method, which kind of encourages you to listen and to play by ear. And so I actually kind of am not great at reading sheet music.
Okay, yeah.
Which is something people don't expect from someone who makes an app like forScore. But I've always been interested in making music. I got into electronic music in my teens. And when the iPad came out, it just, like the moment I saw it, it just looked like something that deserved sheet music. That seemed like the number one thing. Any kind of document really, but like it's just like flashbacks to all these people with big carts on wheels and like way too much paper. It seemed really obvious to me that was something that needed to happen. So I took my very limited experience at that point and bought a book on programming and figured it out from there.
So this is your first project, and you've as we'll talk about, you've spanned off and done some other related apps to forScore, but this was your first app. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It was written for iPhone OS 3.2 using the simulator. Yeah. Because for about 4 months after it was announced, nobody had outside of Apple had even touched one.
Yes.
So that was a fun learning curve. I was like, oh, there's all this stuff I've done in theory, and now I'm actually running it on my first device, and turns out I made all sorts of assumptions about performance on a Mac that don't translate to this thing. That was fun.
Yeah, so this must have been quite the journey over these past 10 years or so, growing as a developer alongside, iOS. I'd imagine starting back then, I don't know, is it easier to start back then, you think, than to start today with iOS being more complicated as it is as a platform?
It would be more daunting, I think. When I started, I was basically able to just create a PDF reader. Nobody really even knew until the last minute that something like iTunes file sharing was going to actually ship. So I built it with about 300 public domain scores included, so that there was something to view. And that was kind of where it started. It was like a public domain sheet music library.
Right.
And then, people were able to add their own, and then annotation became a thing. And so like it evolved really quickly into something else as I had hoped it would. But I think it would be a much more daunting proposition now to say, okay, we've got everything from Apple Pencil to SwiftUI and contextual menus and like layers of complexity that absolutely did not exist back then. But from a technical level, 2010 was like retain and release and like garbage collection and oh my god, all of these things that you had to think about that would make a lot of people's eyes gloss over at this point. That you don't have to deal with. So it's far simpler to do what I did back then, but that's not enough now. So I guess that's my really complicated answer.
Yeah. And what's your current iPad setup, and do you use it for stuff other than using your own app?
I wish I did. The problem I have is that I have to test with so many different devices and I'm constantly upgrading that I never have one set up perfectly for me. So like when I travel, I have an iPad mini. I have the latest iPad mini and I love that size. I think it's fantastic. At my desk, I'm switching between the 11-inch and the 12.9-inch iPad Pros. I've got the M2 for testing Apple Pencil hover support. I've got the M1. It's funny that they keep releasing new models that don't seem very different from the old ones, but that have like one key thing.
One little thing. And with your app, with Apple Pencil, hover seems like something you'd want to try.
Absolutely. And Apple Pencil in general is just a fantastic thing. We're going to talk a lot about that, I think, today.
For sure. So my background, I was a music major, composition major in college. So iPad came out 2010. I graduated in 2010, so I used it for just a couple months before graduation hit. And I remember the days of having, especially in pit orchestra or whatever, having this book that you're just going through. I'm not, and it's probably, I don't know with pit orchestra if it's still like that, because I remember them licensing that stuff out. I don't know if there's companies that have digital versions of like pit orchestra stuff that's very protected as far as giving that back in.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that environment's like these days.
Yeah,
but and you're down there in the dark with the little light attached to the stand, so an iPad would alleviate that need as well. So as you've been developing the app over the years, what have been some of your favorite advances to the iPad kind of hardware over time? It's shifted quite a bit over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I said it already, but I think Apple Pencil is absolutely number one. It's not just that it came along and made annotation far more practical. It's that they somehow keep finding ways to push it forward. Yeah, I'm really surprised because you look at the iPad in general, and there's a lot of work going into the fundamental technologies there. But the iPad is, I would say, more stagnant than the iPhone, except for the Apple Pencil. The Apple Pencil seems to be where they keep finding new ways to connect the dots and to make things more interesting. I think that's absolutely number one. It's not just things like the double tap to undo or redo or whatever switch tools. It's now the hover gesture, which it doesn't seem like much of a deal. It seems like it's just an aesthetic thing, but when you pair it with something like live annotation, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. No, Apple Pencil's been remarkable, and not even needing to update the Apple Pencil hardware to enable that's super cool as well.
Exactly.
Any other general iPad thoughts before we move on to forScore?
I really love the iPad. I think it's the coolest device that I've seen in a long time, and I can't believe that for being basically a square of glass, it's still as compelling as it was back then in so many cool ways.
Yeah, the first moment of using maps and just zooming in with your fingers was just ooh, this gonna be a fun time with this device. So you mentioned you have multiple iPads for testing. What's your oldest up and running iPad you kind of test with forScore?
Oh boy, I have an iPad Air 2, I think.
Yeah.
I That's probably the oldest one.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got a couple of old phones too, but I just forScore 14 dropped support for iOS 14.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So every chance I get to drop support for an old OS, especially in a situation like where Apple has not dropped any devices between 13 and 15. Mm-hmm. So anyone who can upgrade to 13 can go all the way to 15. So
Yes.
I don't feel so bad dropping support for something like 14. But that's usually my chance to pair out my old devices and send them off to a better place.
Yes. So we've briefly mentioned it. Sheet music is what forScore is for. Can you kind of describe it a bit more in depth as far as what this app is for and who is it for?
Yeah, so it's for musicians who play from sheet music. It's an organizer and viewer. So it's primarily a sheet music reader. It puts the sheet music on screen with as few distractions as possible, gets out of your way, and then helps you organize those pieces of music into set lists or into categories so you can find them, and then augments that experience with things like annotation, audio, playback, like backing tracks and things. And then adds on tools like a metronome, a tuner, piano keyboard. So it's primarily just a way to display your sheet music and access it quickly, and then adds on a bunch of layers to try and make your life easier as a musician to address those little niggles as they come up.
Yeah, and we'll talk about later, the page turning mechanisms you built in are quite clever as well. So you're not fiddling around with reaching up as much as you do in the paper world. I've been to many concerts, and I've been the victim of a stand falling in the paper going everywhere.
Yep. Yeah. It's a rite of passage.
Yes. So this app is clearly iPad first, but it's also available for iPhone and Mac. I'm curious, I can't imagine marching band people are using iPhones to mount it to their clarinets, but have you seen crazy uses of the iPhone and the Mac? How are people using it there?
I have seen almost exactly that, actually. iPhones attached to brass instruments in marching bands.
That's awesome.
It does happen.
Yeah.
Now the iPhone was born out of the iPad's adoption of split view and slide over. It became obvious kind of around whenever that was, 2013, 14. It became obvious that locking an iPad device into a specific screen size was not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
And if I was going to do all the work to adjust for these multitasking modes, then it made sense to try and shrink it down onto an iPhone as well. And I think it's interesting because you see so many apps that go from iPhone to iPad,
right,
and they end up looking pretty Spartan on the iPad, whereas forScore has taken advantage of every corner it can find, and then you have to squeeze that down. It definitely changed how I approached design and was an interesting challenge. But then the obvious question is, well, why the heck would anyone try to read sheet music on an iPhone? And that's where Reflow came in, which was a system I built for parsing systems of music and then rearranging them, laying them out end to end like a horizontal teleprompter. So you can take a standard piece of sheet music and turn it into one long stream of music that you can actually scroll through on an iPhone.
Yeah.
So before that point, it didn't make any sense. But once I cracked that, once I figured out that I had some sort of solution for reading sheet music on a phone, then it became, okay, well, let's do this. Let's make this a phone-compatible app. And then the Mac came out, and Mac has always been my number one. It's always been where I started. It's where I love to work. So making a Mac version was a dream.
Yeah.
Catalyst has been a little hit and miss in spots, but Catalyst being I don't know if anyone knows, but the technology that Apple introduced that lets iPad apps work on the Mac with minimal effort. Then that's something that I love to develop for myself and for the people who do use it. It doesn't get nearly as much use, just like the iPhone doesn't get nearly as much use, but it's something I believe in. It's something I want to create, so it gets love.
Yeah, imagine a MacBook, you could pop it on top of a piano pretty nicely and use it in there, and you can angle the screen much better than you could most iPads, I'd say. And is the keyboard a bigger part of the Mac app, and did the kind of learnings you had of using more keyboard and trackpad interactions come down to the iPad for further interactions there if you are using it in that orientation?
I think the the Mac support and the improved keyboard and trackpad support on the iPad came at right about the same time. So I would say they're pretty equally balanced.
Yeah.
I think anything you can use a keyboard and trackpad or mouse for on a Mac, you could easily make the same argument for on an iPad. And I think they work pretty interchangeably, and I credit Apple a lot for that. I think the obvious use cases for organizing your sheet music. You don't want to sit there and type on the software keyboard all day.
No.
So that's number one. And then things like text annotations as well.
Yeah. Is there page turning with just like a spacebar hit, or what's the gesture there for using keyboard for that?
And there's a couple. You can use the arrow keys, and then I think return and space.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a number of combinations you can use based on the different page turning peripherals that came out early on. Those were mostly keyboard based.
Yeah.
So one company would show up and say, "Oh, these are the two keys we use."
Yes.
Some other company would have different. So there's like a set of built-in ones, but they're also totally customizable in forScore, so you can use whatever you like.
Yeah, and the accessory scene has evolved quite a bit since iPad hit. There's now music stands that are basically iPad music stands. There's Bluetooth pedals. What are some of the big hardware accessories you've grown fond of over the years?
Oh, there's so many. I am such a gadgeter. At some point when I was bored, I decided to test out using the iPad's magnetometer to see if I could reliably detect changes in an electromagnet to turn pages. I went super elementary school. I took a wrench and some copper wire, and I like wrapped it around, and I connected it to a battery, and I had this proof of concept, and it was so fun. I'm always looking for cheap ways to create page turners, cheap technologies, so that people can have what they need without the cost, without the barrier. But there's everything from like turning your head with AirPods on to double tapping the pencil. I think could even work. I think you can program that in. Then there's all the keyboard based page turners. Then there was the second generation that mostly relied on Bluetooth LE. There are Bluetooth MIDI devices. You can just use MIDI signals without Bluetooth. Yeah, I mean, now there's face gestures. You can wink at your screen and it flips the page for you.
Yeah.
It's basically you can find a way that works for you as long as you don't have to reach out and tap the screen.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone straps an Apple Pencil to their musical instrument for the double tap.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, that could be an interesting setup. Yeah. So we're at version 14. Kind of is there an origin story? You mentioned this. The iPad came out, and you were like, sheet music needs to be on this. And kind of where did it start, and what have been some of the major additions over the year to bring us to where we are today?
You mean with forScore 14 specifically, or just from the start?
From the start, yeah.
I think the core set of problems that I've been trying to solve have been pretty much there from the start. It's how to make the sheet music look as good as possible, turn as quickly as possible, how to annotate as naturally as possible. Those are kind of the three big ones, and everything since then has just gotten me closer to where I want to be with that.
Yeah.
Like, again, Apple Pencil, the way it interacts, the number of ways I've been able to tie that into forScore are incredible. You can now just write on the page, and it just like there used to be annotation mode. You'd have to enter annotation mode, then you can start drawing, then you have to save your work. Now it's basically transparent. You could just draw, and when you're done, it's done. Just like
paper. Like if you're in a rehearsal, someone yells at you, do this, you
exactly
grab your pencil and do it.
And that's what everyone kept telling me. It was like, look, this is great, but this is not like there's still this little bit of friction. I need to be able to work quickly, and everything I do basically attempts to get closer and closer to that, and I think we've pretty much gotten there.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
No, that's awesome. Now, one of the little things I want to mention first is you have setting profiles, which I don't think I've seen this in hardly any other app. The ability to have different settings set up. So you have a configuration for jazz versus concert band or marching band. You can have different settings and just load that profile up. Was that kind of hard to from a UI perspective to figure out how to convey? You can have these different settings and to swap between them, and where'd this idea come from? Well,
it ties a little bit into forScore Pro. So I think when we talk a little bit more about that, we can can dive into that more. But basically, I wanted to create user level support, and Apple just wasn't coming to the table with it. They've done some stuff in education, but it requires that everything be offloadable to the cloud at a moment's notice. It's pretty fragile. It's not really popular. You don't see the average person wandering around with an iPad with two users on it. But basically, this is a huge need that I've seen, and they weren't helping me address that. And I thought, okay, well, what is the core goal here? We already have libraries, so you can already separate your stuff out into 2 libraries. So if you are sharing your iPad with your kid, you've got, separate silos for that stuff. But what else could change? And it mostly comes down to forScore's settings, and it could be a number of different settings. It could be, whether you like the tab bar showing. If you're working with multiple pieces pretty regularly, you want the tab bar visible, or you have this gesture that works great when you're tweaking a piece, when you're getting ready, but when you're in performance, you want the bare minimum.
Yeah.
So settings profiles was just basically a list of settings that you can just save and restore, permitted settings, and then a little UI for just switching between them. From a UI perspective, it was not hard, but it was an itch I wanted to scratch, and that seemed like the best way to get there without actually having users.
The Reflow mode, that would also enable you to have different zoom settings, right? Mm-hmm. So that could be another thing. People have different eyesight abilities with that. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So you mentioned at the beginning, forScore had public domain music because we weren't quite sure iTunes file sharing and that whole system, if that is that going to work really well. So today, how do you get sheet music into forScore? I'm sure there's a couple different ways at this point.
As many ways as there are to turn pages. It ties into Apple's share functionality. So anytime you get a share sheet from anywhere related to a PDF, you can just send it over. So that means Mail, Safari, any third-party app, anything that shares a PDF, you can just dump it into forScore. It also works with the Files app. So if you put anything into forScore's folder through the Files app, then it appears. You can create templates, and you can create a name and a number of pages, and it creates a PDF from that template. There's some built-in. You can add your own. You can scan them in with the camera.
Which that seems super cool. Like if I'm thinking about the college, so they hand out the sheet music and to practice or whatever, I can just scan that right in. The scanning on iPad's really remarkable, how well that actually works.
Early on, I actually had a standalone darkroom app because the iPad didn't have a camera. So I had a phone app that people could buy and use that to send their stuff over to forScore.
Very cool. Yeah. With the templates, how do you see those used most? Because the templates I've seen, they're blank sheet music. So is it primarily for annotation and you're writing in different, practice things, scales, or whatever you want to do?
Yeah, it can be. It can also be for things like you got a set list and you need to add a page in between songs that has some text on it. You can just create a blank one and then you can annotate on it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And the annotation system, how in depth does this get here? Do you have things to make it easier to add like flat signs versus writing a B? You have just stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's like a rubber stamp tool. That has a whole bunch of presets. There's a shapes tool for things that aren't a specific size, things like crescendos. So you can just drag and draw a shape from one point to another. And then all sorts of drawing presets. You can create your own presets. And layer support, so you can have different sets of annotations, separate them out into layers like you could in Photoshop, and you can show and hide them. So if you've got a set that you want while you're rehearsing, you can hide that while you're performing, or vice versa.
Nice. And PDF, is that the one and only format, or does MIDI work like in some way, or are there other file formats the music world has adopted in any way?
No, when I started, I felt like trying to make forScore work with a bunch of different formats was going to be an endless job.
Yes.
That would never be quite right. Notation is a really nuanced thing. You can take the concept of music and you can write it in a number of different ways stylistically. So like how do you turn MIDI into sheet music is a problem that will never be
Yes.
solved,
No.
really. So I didn't have the tools, and I didn't really have the interest to go in that direction. So I decided, you know what? You look around, what are the digital files that people have? They're PDFs. They're pretty much all PDFs.
Yeah.
So I'm going to build an app that goes to them. And that's where I've stuck. You know, there's a little built-in converter that lets you throw a text document into forScore, and it'll turn that into a PDF for you at a really basic level. But for the most part, no, it's PDF all the way.
And what would you call it? It's not quite OCR, but how's the reflow work? You're analyzing that PDF, and it works well across like jazz print as well as classical. Like how has that side of things been for making sense of PDFs?
I want to say that I have an advanced trained, ML model using AI to figure this out. And at some point I probably will, but right now it's just dumb math.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the pixel colors. I'm just separating it out as
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then as far as we mentioned getting sheet music into forScore, there is a store within forScore, and you also link up to these other ecosystems. What does kind of the digital music ecosystem look like these days? The ones that you plug into, is it a vibrant shop? Is there a Kindle equivalent these days for sheet music?
Well, I'll start by saying Kindle and Apple's iBooks stores are not. They don't play nicely. They don't let you have PDF copies.
A lot of DRM as far as those two.
Yeah. They're siloed. So that's unfortunate because people do find those, and then they come to me and say, why can't I open it?
Does Kindle actually sell sheet music? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they do. They have a couple that I've seen.
Yeah.
So when forScore started, there were the scores that were included. There was the public domain stuff. At some point, that became unnecessary. So I pivoted that into a storefront, and I offered most of those scores. I think all of them at the start were for free, but I invited other people to contribute their own music and to sell it through forScore. And it was an accounting nightmare, logistically speaking.
Yeah.
It was just not tenable. Apple's system is not really built for that. They have kind of a maximum number of in-app purchases you can have, and you have to manually enter them all in. It wasn't working. So I went back to...
That could be a cool thing. It would be, besides accounting, the nightmare would also be who's uploading copyrighted music to sell. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And having contracts with all of these publishers and paying them every month. And it was not the right direction.
Yes.
So I pivoted, and I started reaching out to some publishers. In fact, I've had conversations with publishers pretty much from the start, and they are an aspirational but slow bunch. I mean, the technology moves a lot quicker than the publishing industry does, and for good reason. That's an industry that's been hurt a lot by piracy, and I don't want to contribute to that.
Yeah.
So I want to find a way to bring them to the table in a way that is equitable. And so I created the Content Provider program, which lets users purchase sheet music through certain third-party websites, and then those websites give me an API so that I can discover that stuff, download it, offer it to them, offer it to the user to download in a protected way. So it's basically just a PDF, but you can't share it, you can't take it off of your iPad.
Yeah.
So it's a great middle ground. It's a nice little perk you get, and I'm always looking to talk to new publishers about adding them in. I think we've got 6 now. I'm hoping to have more. I think that's the future, because digital sheet music, really good sheet music, is so much better than any scan, any bad, photocopy with black margins.
And you get those as a student. You'll have the director. They're not supposed to, I don't think, but they just copy these things, and they'll make copies of copies, and it's like, what is this? Yeah. Yeah. So, another huge benefit of digital sheet music is rather than a metronome kind of in the corner, you can have the page kind of pulse. And I'd imagine you can actually link the bar to when the metronome would change. Is that right? How's the metronome system work within forScore?
Yeah, it's not that advanced. It's you can have a specific tempo per piece. You can set up like a button in the middle if you need to change the tempo.
I see. Yep.
It doesn't really match up with any part of the music.
Okay.
What it does do is you can enter in a number of beats per page, and then it'll turn once that number is reached.
I see.
So you can kind of pre-program your page turns based on the metronome.
And that ties into the metadata, so you have to just set that once for the piece of music and never have to... Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, very cool. And yeah, has the metronome always been kind of the pulsing page, or how's that kind of evolved over the years?
Yeah, but that's one of like the 1.0 features, or at least the 1.x. That was one of like 3 things that I had come up with very early on that are basically unchanged. It was the pulsating metronome, which I billed as the metronome that Beethoven never had.
Yeah.
There's the half page turns, which let you sort of rip the page in half so you can keep playing the bottom half of the current page while seeing the top half of the next page. So there's no visual interruption as you move from page to page. Mm-hmm. And then links, which are little tappable dots that take you from one spot in the current piece of sheet music to another. Yeah. So great for handling repeats and things. And those 3 are basically unchanged from the start.
Yeah, very cool. In the links, it's so smart, like being able to do that, because you have some music. I remember it's like multiple pages for. It's like, oh gosh, where am I? The concert trying to get to the right page again.
Torture.
Yeah. So a bunch of organizational tools in here. You mentioned before set lists. There's bookmarks, flagging, tags, labels, now playing. You have multiple libraries. I'm sure there's some I'm missing. So what's the best way to kind of organizing your music? I'm sure everyone has different needs, which is why there's different tools in here.
Exactly, and I try to make it as progressive as possible. So you can start with what you see right in front of you. You can organize it by, say, composer, if that's the most important thing, or you can use genre or whatever you want to use. You stick with your primary method of organization, and you go and you add that in, and it separates them out, and you can easily find them, and you can just work in that one layer for as long as you like. And then as you find other ways, I do need to cross-reference this by key or whatever, you can go in and you can start to discover some of those things. It was really important to me that forScore be powerful and that it never be too powerful to get in the way of basic usage. So honestly, if you want to dump your PDFs in by file name and put them in the all scores folder and never categorize anything, you can do that.
Yeah.
You can search for it by name. You can see it in the list. It'll work. Every layer of organization added on top of that is just a convenience to help you get more out of your library.
And do you get the OCR your documents prior to import for that like text search to function, or is there some basic OCR built into forScore at this point?
It's not OCR. There's actual text reading of PDFs. So if they're digital PDFs, the text will be included in there.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's the extent of it.
Okay. And the idea behind the dashboard, it kind of reminds me of Apple's kind of like screen time. Where did the dashboard come from, and what uses have you seen for this?
It was an early suggestion. People just wanted to see what they were playing and how long they were playing it. More specifically, in an educational environment, letting students track their time playing and then report that back to a teacher. It was something that I thought was really interesting. It gave me a chance to explore a number of different new UI things, like the goals were circles right around when the Apple Watch was becoming a thing and had its rings and stuff. So it was like, okay, I can see this. I want to try something new. It's not heavily used, but for the people who do use it, it scratches that itch.
Yeah, there were times when teachers like, you didn't practice, did you? It's like, no, go home. It's like, okay. So the dashboard, that seems like it could, as a student, be highly useful. And making sure, I neglected this piece that I really don't like to practice. Let's get on this. And yeah, so that seems really, really, really smart, and could be very useful for that. Does the dashboard data just live within the dashboard itself, or is it easy to generate reports from the past week or month or whatever the case be?
Well, it goes back, I think, 90 days total.
Okay. Gotcha.
So you can go back and get your own data from the current device, but it doesn't share it beyond the current device.
Okay.
I've been, from the start, I've been pretty adamant that I don't really want to get into account creation storing your stuff on my servers, especially with the potential for copyright infringement with PDFs. I didn't really want to be in that business. So forScore's privacy policy is basically, nope, we don't want it.
Yeah.
I don't have accounts. I don't collect data. I don't even have analytics in the app, because at the end of the day, I have enough users that I trust that people will let me know when there's something that I've gotten wrong or something that I've missed. That's the kind of app I want to create. I don't want to focus so much on numbers, because I think numbers can lie. But yeah, so dashboard data is all stored on device. Is my answer.
And I think there is backup in Sync through iCloud. Is that primarily settings, or what is sunk between devices and backed up?
Yeah, syncing is relatively new now. It does save your files to your iCloud account.
Okay.
On Apple servers.
Yes. Okay.
So nothing hits me, but yeah.
Okay. Very cool. And then anything to note on the different kind of display options? There's people use dark mode. There's different single or dual pages, depending on how you want to. What kind of different display options people have access to here?
Well, there's that. There's a sepia mode. So when you're in the pit, you're not glowing. You're not a ghost.
Yes.
And then the display, the page display modes. That was something kind of spurred on by this move from iPads all having the same aspect ratio to now, oops, you're in split view. Oops, you're on an iPhone. Oh, and now there's an 11-inch iPad that has an aspect ratio that's completely different than anything else we've ever made before. So I had to figure out, okay, I gotta take this 768 by 1024 screen size that I've used forever, and I don't just need to make the page fit better. I need to make sure the annotations still line up.
Right.
So I've done a lot of work on that. I'm really proud of. There are a number of different ways to really maximize the view of each page on the screen, and then additional tools even beyond that, so you can crop pages, or you can just zoom in on a score if it has pretty consistent margins.
Yeah, and then how does Reflow work with annotations? It kind of links it to that part of the page.
Yeah, they get displayed. Basically, it gets flattened before I display it, so anything that's in that area just shows up as normal.
Gotcha. Nice. So, something I was delighted to find is my original purchase. Did the app come out in 2010?
Yep.
Yeah, so my purchase 13 years ago, I was able to download version 14.
For $2.99, right?
Yeah, that was my original price, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Best $3 I've ever spent. So, and as you said, this thing's been continually updated and keeping up with the latest technologies and abilities with Apple Pencil. But you do now have a forScore Pro subscription if you do want to, support development of this app that's been going for 13 years, very strong here. So what features does this enable outside of just enabling this app to continue to exist with financial support?
Well, I've been really lucky, I have to say, first of all, that word of mouth has done all the work here. People have like, my customers are responsible for where forScore is today. It's been supported endlessly, and I'm so thankful for that. But it was table stakes back then to say free updates for life.
Yeah.
It was one purchase up front, and that's that. And I do kind of wish Apple had eased up on that. I wish we could get trial versions. I wish we could have upgrade pricing, but they've made it clear for so long now that that's not really where they are. So I had to pivot, and I had to do my own thing.
Yeah. It's quite the workaround to try to do anything like a trial. Like, it's some developers kind of hack their way into it, but it's not designed for it, at all.
Yeah. So the bigger reason forScore Pro exists is, I would say, first of all, customer support. If you buy an app for $3 and you email us and we spend 10 minutes answering your email, we've lost money.
Yes. Yeah.
And that sucks, but that's, Apple takes 30% of the purchase price, and then taxes go away out of that, and you're left with, $1.50. Now, of course, it's a lot more than that. Yeah. But customer support is a drain on resources. I had to stop handling it personally years ago. And so I do pay someone to do that for me, Isaac. And so forScore Pro was primarily intended to help ease that burden, to say, you know what, most of these emails we're getting are like the question at the top of the FAQ.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out how to solve that. We have to put up a little bit of a barrier there so that people can't just be bombarding us with so many questions every day in and day out that we can't make forScore anymore.
Right.
So forScore Pro was kind of the dividing line between like, look, if you ask us a question that's answered in the FAQ, we're not going to answer it unless you're a forScore Pro subscriber. Then we'll direct you to it.
Yeah.
And that line has shifted over time. We're constantly reevaluating how we approach support in a way that is most effective to all users, because otherwise you're asking users to pay a lot more upfront because of the small number of users who rely on support a lot more than the others. And that's not fair. So that's number one. Number two is that I wanted to make a more interesting app. I wanted to do things like drag down menus, where you tap and hold, you touch and you drag downward on any of the menu items in the main toolbar, and it gives you this little, basically contextual menu before those were a thing. That's a really cool idea. I built that. I loved it. I wanted to use it, but I knew it would be confusing. I knew that a lot of people who didn't know what it was would see it pop up briefly. They would wonder why they tried to tap and it didn't go. That's the kind of thing where I was like, I need a solution for this. So forScore Pro was a way to create two apps without creating two apps. It let me add things that I thought were really interesting, really useful, and kind of niche without getting in the way of the average user. Because if it came right down to it, if I had to have one or the other, I would get rid of the forScore Pro features. It's not worth having things in there that are going to confuse people, with a couple of exceptions like face gestures. But that's pretty much how that went. Also, Apple was at the time incentivizing people to create subscriptions by lowering their cut. So the business decision was easy. Apple was saying subscriptions are the future. I don't think that's true. I still think that there's room for a paid upfront app that's really great. But this gives me some ways to balance that and to move forward as sustainably as possible.
Yeah. And so the gestures, I was really blown away by, especially the mouth one. This thing's brilliant. You just kind of like half smile in one direction and it'll turn the page. 100% accuracy in my testing.
It's worse when you have a beard.
It's worse or better?
Yeah, a little worse when you have a beard.
A little worse, okay.
For me, maybe my beard's weird.
And yeah, I don't know how you did this or something. It's brilliant. And this is stuff that I would have just dreamed of as a student. One thing I didn't consider, actually, I'm a saxophone player primarily. Wind instruments must have a more difficult time than pianists trying to do some of the face gestures.
That's why I added the wink detection with the latest version.
Yeah,
that opens it up to a number of people who couldn't use it before.
Yeah, that makes total sense for because I was testing with the wink. It's like I need to practice my winking because most time I can't get just one eye closed, and it needs just the one eye, I believe.
Yeah.
Have you considered a double eye wink as an option, or is that hard to detect?
I don't know. I'd have to look into that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. People think that face gestures mostly comes down to being able to collect the data, and Apple's doing most of that. They're giving me basically percentages of how likely it is that someone is doing a specific thing.
Yeah.
The hard part is turning that into a reliable page turner. There's a lot of nuance there that I discovered, a lot of work put into it, because you can take it conceptually and you could just say, oh, it was detected. 75% is close enough. Let's just turn the page when it hits 75%, and it starts flipping multiple times, and
it could be a nightmare scenario if it's not done right.
Yeah. So I was really surprised when I really dug down into it to figure out, here's a problem. How do I fix that? Here's another problem. How do I fix that? And I think it's really important to add that layer of intelligence on top of the raw data to really make something like that work. I hope I have.
Yeah. Does it use only the image camera, or if you're on a Face ID iPad, are there added benefits with the gestures as far as what it's picking up?
No, I wish. Face ID works in the dark. Face gestures does not. It's image processing. Gotcha. It doesn't use any of the magic.
Okay. So lighting is a factor. You can't use this in a pit orchestra probably unless you have a spotlight on you.
Right.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. That'd be a funny setup. You have like the little headlamp above your
a visor.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So winking is brand new for 14. Then you had the mouth. Any other gestures I'm missing?
It's the mouth movements, the winking, and head turning.
You have an AirPod in for that one?
Well, there's head turning with face gestures, so it just analyzes where you're looking as you turn your head, and then the AirPods thing is separate. That's actually using the fitness tracking, the motion sensor in the AirPods. So that's even more reliable, and you could use one or both, and you can use them in the dark, and you can use them with transparency mode on, so it's not blocking your hearing.
Yeah.
That's a really cool one, too.
Yeah, Imagine AirPods Pro 2 have been a big... I imagine users that would benefit greatly on that one because transparency is so much better and clearer than before.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can't imagine many people using AirPods Max with forScore. With transparency mode...
They're so heavy.
They are so heavy. But transparency mode on the Macs are quite nice. Does that even have this? Does that have the same sensors? Would it work with the Macs?
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those little caveats that I haven't actually tested on the Mac reliably enough to remember.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if it has the same accelerometers. It might be a whole different thing. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then another screen I just want to point out is the device information screen, which I just love. Mm-hmm. You just boot up the screen, tells you, is your device new enough to have the face tracking and motion processing and all that. For these gestures, how new of an iPad do you need for that to be supported?
That's a good question, and I can't answer that definitively because sometimes these things change with software updates.
Yeah.
So one of the iPad no modifiers didn't have it and then suddenly did with, I think, like iOS 12.2 or something. There's some update that just showed up and suddenly like, oh, I got to add this to the list now. That's cool. So it's hard to know, but most anything you can buy these days will support everything except the Apple Pencil specific stuff. That's M2 only.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The hover gestures. And
then there is a built-in piano. And I'm curious, in uses of that, as far as performing, it seems like it's good for like dabbling a bit, but it might be a bit tricky. Does the app support MIDI at all? If you hook up a MIDI keyboard to the iPad to have playback from that?
Yep. It does. There's a lot of MIDI support. So the keyboard, like you said, is primarily just for, I need to tap out a few notes here and see what this sounds like.
Yeah. I imagine vocalists might use it to get reference pitches for intervals. Yeah.
Sure. But yeah, it responds to MIDI signals, so it can highlight the notes as you play on an external keyboard. It can play those notes in forScore with or without the keyboard showing. And then there's MIDI functionality built into a number of other places too. You can use MIDI signals as like custom shortcuts in the page turners and shortcuts settings panel. So you can do almost anything with a MIDI signal. You can open a specific score with a MIDI signal. You can have scores send MIDI signals when they're opened.
Yeah,
which is really fun. I'm probably forgetting some. There's a lot of MIDI.
Yeah, MIDI is a fun technology. It's ancient, but
it is so dumb and so good.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, it's like, oh, this is neat. Back then, I had to have like a USB adapter to make it work with computers, and it had this big box that like was part of the adapter. It's now you just plug in a USB port. It feels like it's all one thing.
Yeah. Where'd the punch cards go?
Oh, right. So before discovering the awesome metadata page, I was going to ask about Apple Music integration, which it turns out it's already in here. So how does this work, and what kind of limitations should people be aware of with, the licensing? I'm sure kind of like sometimes pokes its head in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so forScore works with your shared device music library, which can contain tracks from Apple Music. They could be synced. And then forScore also works with locally stored files, so you can send audio files into forScore and use them directly if you want. But nice. There's kind of like 3 or 4 layers of what forScore can do based on how much access it has to the file. So if you've got a locally stored file or a file in the music app that has been downloaded, it can get the raw file data and it can play it, and it can give you all sorts of adjustments to speed and pitch and stuff like that. If the file isn't actually downloaded, if it's streaming, then it becomes more limited. And that API itself has caused me a lot of problems over the years. So your mileage does vary a little bit when it comes to stuff that isn't concrete, stuff that isn't on your device.
Yeah.
But I do my best to fall back gracefully as things become available and unavailable. But once you've got the track in, you can program your page turns to specific points in the track so that as it's playing, it'll flip for you. You can loop if you want to hear a specific portion, things like that.
Is there any ability with the new karaoke function to tap into that to, get rid of the lead vocal so you could have that be you instead of the vocalist within forScore?
No, I wish. No. That's a locked down internal only thing.
So that'd be so nice if you could tap into that to change the mix a bit.
Yeah. It would.
Yeah. So speaking of the metadata, one of the things completely redesigned for 14 was the metadata page. So what's changed? What are kind of the goals of this page?
That panel was created really early on to fit the same size as the main menu, because you would tap the little arrow button next to a score in the menu and it would push that view onto the stack and it would be that same size. Yeah. And that was an okay decision at the time. It was a horrible decision in the long run. Yeah. I went through so many design iterations trying to squeeze way too much into there that I finally reached the point where I said, all right, I need to rewrite this from scratch. I need to make this flexible. I need to use modern design cues. This isn't working anymore. So I created a sidebar on larger screens or a tab bar on smaller screens, and I divided them up into sections, and I made them far more flexible. So the idea being that if I want to add another type of metadata in the future, I don't have to make that decision based on whether or not there's space in the panel for it, which is what I was doing before, and that was ridiculous. But that was the impetus, and I love it. I think it looks so much better. I know some people don't like the stock iOS design. It looks a little stale to some people, but I think it's been evolving quite nicely over the last couple of years as we've gotten back into slightly rounded shapes, a few drop shadows here and there, and I think it looks nice and clean and is less distracting. And I think it's always been my goal to make it feel as iOS-y as possible, because I hate going into an app and having to relearn how to share things from scratch. And yeah, that always bugs me.
Yeah. So you mentioned Apple Music is in there. What other kind of very useful metadata fields and information can you tie to a song or score?
Well, you can do just about anything text-based. There's composer, genre, tags, labels. All of those can be renamed. They are comma separated, so you can have more than one value. So you could define it however you want. You can change that from composers to artists or whomever. Then there's a reference, a unique reference, key, rating difficulty, and I think that's it.
Okay, very cool.
And all of these things help you in the menus. They help you organize. You can see by these things or sort by them. So things like key, you can't, there's not a main category for C major, but like you go into everything by composer X and you can sort by key. So there's two levels of kind of organizing and finding things that way.
Yeah, very cool. And then another tool outside of Metronome is the tuner, and that's been rewritten as well. What was it like before, and kind of what would you end up with here?
That was pretty much unchanged since its introduction, which I want to say was somewhere between 2012, 2013.
Okay.
It was creaky, and that's kind of okay, because pitch analysis is a not a fast-moving art. So a lot of the examples you can find are basically unchanged from 25 years ago, written in C. So it wasn't an easy target for me to replace, but I did get to the point where I was like, all right, this doesn't work well enough, and I want to make it better. And while I'm at it, I'm going to dive really in deep with Swift UI, and I'm going to make something that can go from watch to Mac, and it does. So it's also it's a standalone app called TuneWave.
Yeah.
It's included in forScore to a limited extent. So that was a really interesting journey for me, learning a lot more about Swift UI than I knew from the start. And I think it has obvious caveats, but it's clear why it's such a darling in Apple right now. It does do a lot.
Yeah. Metronome on the watch seems like such a natural fit with it using the haptics on your wrist. That seems like there's got to be a fair bit of action there.
Except that the Apple Watch is intended for brief interactions.
Will it shut down if the screen goes quiet?
I don't know.
Okay,
It would have at one point. When I looked into it, that would have been the case.
Yeah.
So I didn't really pursue it any further. By the time I did look back into it, a lot of other people had made similar things.
Okay.
So it's not a need I need to scratch, but I definitely thought the same thing.
Yeah, and I imagine haptics might totally just turn off if it's not active. Yeah, that's such a weird... I understand the constraint, but they should have a mode if you're on the Apple Watch Ultra thing to suck up the battery if you want to.
I love my Apple Watch Ultra. That's great.
Yeah. And then, I'm still waiting to get mine at some point. I'm probably going to get version 2. It was on the Series 7 stainless steel, so riding that out a little bit longer.
Nice.
StoreKit version 2 is implemented here, and the store itself, I have to say, it's kind of awesome. It reminds me of like the App Store, but just within forScore, and it also lets you kind of showcase in a more visual manner like some features, like the AirPods gestures. It kind of lets you kind of an alternative way to learn about the app within the store, which is kind of nice as well.
Yeah, that was also came down to the fact that when I was rethinking the storefront, I wasn't really sure what was going to be the primary emphasis for it, what was going to work out. I knew that I wanted third-party content, but I had just kind of wound down the publisher program.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, what does this look like? What is this for? And I did take cues from the App Store at the time, which did have some editorial stuff, and I figured, you know what, this is something that I could create and update server side. So I can I can add things, I can change things whenever I want, and the app will just present them in this one interface. And this is a great way for me to post things about new updates, or to talk about features, or to showcase new apps that I've made, along with obviously having the content and being the one of the main interaction points for content providers through search, because you can search in the storefront and you can find things available through places like Music Notes. Yeah. And it'll take you over there. You can go and make your purchase, and when you come back, it'll look to see if anything has changed, and it'll download it for you when you're done. But yeah, it was definitely probably like Dashboard. It was something that was fueled in large part by my interest in trying a new design.
Yeah. So you can search the partners you plug into. Is that what you...
Yeah, the ones that offer a search API. Okay. So right now that's Music Notes and Virtual Sheet Music. I'm hoping some of the others will come along with their own APIs too.
And to get set up with the partners, you basically go to their kind of website and get the account set up there, or is there some kind of account setup process within the app?
Yeah, I stay away from account setup and from the actual purchasing, because Apple has really fuzzy rules about what constitutes an in-app purchase and whether or not you're allowed to tell people that they can buy things outside of your app.
Yes, so they are very funny about that.
I have to toe that line a lot. But for now, you just go over, you set up your account on your own. You need to know where to find that website and how to use it, and I help you from there.
Gotcha, yeah. Another discovery I made within the store was the forScore Q app, which seems really incredible. So rather than having to wait for this big 16-inch iPad Pro, you can link up to 12.9s or to 11 inches and have two sheets of music side by side.
Exactly.
Any other use of the forScore Q, or is that kind of the main scenario of it?
I mean, it started as a remote control, so it was basically an iPhone app that let you control a nearby iPad. So you could turn pages from the audience, say.
Yeah.
And then dual page mode came along, and I think that pretty much reshaped the app itself and pivoted into a whole new thing that I think is really incredible. You've not only got the ability to view two pages side by side, they coordinate how they turn pages. You can use links and buttons, or maybe just links on either and on either side, and it works. You can turn pages from either screen. I think it's so natural because, sheet music is two pages mostly.
So when you boot this up, forScore Q, and have them paired, the main iPad will have different UI elements than forScore Q, or how's... Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So Q becomes a viewer, so it shows the page, it has some of the on-screen elements, and it responds to tap and swipe gestures, but otherwise the main device has all of the other forScore interface stuff on it.
And like annotations you need to be mindful of and do on the main device? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And is it a local connection? Like, how is it talking to the other app, iPad?
Yeah, it uses Apple's frameworks, so it's usually a combination of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Nice. And that's all behind the scenes.
Yeah, that seems brilliant. Are there music stands that support multiple iPads easily, or?
I don't know. I've never seen one.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be a curious thing to explore.
Yeah.
The worst thing in the world would be someone smashing a music stand with two iPads.
Oh God, the value. Ugh.
Yeah, but I'm sure people that do use this have ways of hearing them properly and all that. The 12 South has the hover bar tower thing that would be, I think, perfect in this scenario. You could have two of those set up side by side.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then secondary window support. And I guess Stage Manager is now out as a thing, which would play into this a bit. I do imagine this app primarily is a big single window. So kind of what's the second window support like, and how's it playing with Stage Manager and all that good stuff?
Sure. forScore was built as a single window app. Absolutely, 100%. I never considered that there would be two copies of the same interface at the same time.
Yeah.
It was not something I planned for, and it was not something that I could just flip over to. So when multi-window support became a thing, I was a little concerned, because forScore had been written for a very different era. And I got to the point where I said, okay, I either need to completely restructure how most of this works, and I'm going to cause a lot of damage in the process, or I can create a whole new forScore experience as the secondary window and write essentially a brand new forScore in plain view over the course of multiple years. Start with the basics. It's okay if it doesn't do everything because it's just secondary windows. It's not the primary interface. And I can add things and go further and further each year until maybe at some point, I have no idea, maybe secondary windows will become the primary interface for the app. So that was what I decided to go for. That was, I think, the right call, because it left everything where it was for existing users. And it's been really fun. It's been really interesting to do. And with 14, I think I've gotten almost all the way there with secondary windows. They can do pretty much everything primary windows can do, except for, let's see, it's the audio utilities. So the metronome, tuner, and pitch pipe are not there. The keyboard is not there. Audio playback is not there.
Okay.
And then I think Q is the other one. Those are pretty much the only things that are not supported right now in secondary windows that I intend to support there.
Okay. And what are some of the uses you've seen of people using the second window for at this point?
I haven't. I don't know.
Okay.
This is something I've been creating. For me, I know that people are using it. I'm glad that they're using it.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to style. I think most of the cases where you'd use secondary windows, you could easily also use tabs, but you just want to see them at the same time.
Yeah, referencing a sheet of music as you're looking at another one kind of thing, maybe. Putting it on the external monitor if you're practicing at your computer with an iPad and you have your desk setup. If you have an external monitor for your iPad or whatever, you have your desk set up. You have the big screen there. That could be a scenario.
There's been external screen support for a while, so that's been there in a different way.
Yeah.
But this also does that. Yeah, if you're on a Mac, you could just drag the window over. Whereas on an iPad, in the past, you could connect an external screen. You'd need a secondary window, a secondary type of display for that. So that was a little different.
Have you? I meant to ask this about forScore Q. Have you ever played around with the whole scenario of syncing? Like a band together with different scores and stuff in the conductor, or is that kind of beyond the bounds with PDF-based scores?
Yeah, so Q does coordinate page turns from a leader to multiple followers. It doesn't move any content around. It can transfer files as needed. So if you are leading a group and someone doesn't have a file that you've opened, it can ask that it tells that user, and that user can request the file, and then the leader will send a copy over to them. But I think the scenario you're probably hinting at a bit more is what used to be the groups feature, where you could coordinate a library that would then be pushed out to other devices.
Right.
And that was a great idea, but it was built off of CloudKit, and Apple was telling people at the time that they were going to charge for it, but they never got around to saying how much.
Yeah.
So I had to price it pretty aggressively or unaggressively, however that works. And it just didn't make financial sense. Nobody used it, and I had to can it.
Yeah.
I think there's a great use case for that kind of stuff. I'd love to explore iCloud sharing at some point, but that just wasn't in the cards with that feature. Yeah.
Have you explored SharePlay out of curiosity? I don't know if that would be a logical technology.
I actually spun off my piano keyboard into Piano with Friends, which is a piano app that uses SharePlay, so people can play piano together from multiple devices anywhere in the world.
That sounds kind of fun.
Yeah.
Nice. And then sharing itself, how is it improved with version 14?
The big addition to the sharing panel there is the ability to actually copy and automation links. So the sharing interface now gives you an easy way to say, I don't actually want to share this. I want to share the directions to this. So it's a special URL that you can use, that you can script. You can basically tap on from anywhere, and it opens up forScore to that specific piece, page, whatever. There are a number of different scenarios. Like if you're looking at a piece in a set list, it asks you, do you want to go to the piece, or do you want to go to the piece within the set list? That's the primary addition there.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
And then anything about the design in general that you want to mention? Either, kind of how it's evolved or where it is today, and anything that you're particularly proud of within the design?
Well, the big news with forScore 14 is the new icon.
Yes.
Which is really scary, because it's been the exact same design. I mean, the background, the gradient has changed, but the symbol has been unchanged.
Yeah, it's like, where'd my forScore go? I updated. Where'd it go?
And it's a scary thing to face, but it's not a good reason to keep something.
No.
So I figured, you know what? I'm going to come up with something new, and I ended up coming up with way too many things that were new. And I ended up with a bunch of icons, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to throw these all in. We're going to pick a default.
Yeah.
We're going to let people decide for themselves. It's time to have some fun with it.
Absolutely.
Because I'm pretty meticulous about how small forScore's download size is, and adding alternate app icons does increase that size. But, at some point, it's worth it.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of fun ones in there. And I think you get a few more with the Pro subscription as well. Yeah.
Yep.
And then anything we didn't cover that you want to before we wrap it up?
I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think so, right? Yeah, I tried to cover all the bases there.
Yeah.
And then we mentioned the piano SharePlay app, and you spun off the tuning app as well, or what are some of the other apps worth mentioning?
There's the music box set of apps, which is the 4 apps. So it's Q, and then there's the tuner, Metronome, and Pitch Pipe, which are TuneWave, Modus, and Onyx. I just renamed them, so I have to remember.
Yeah.
And then I have a little MIDI recorder called Nocturne that I made for my own purposes that I adore, and then the piano app as well. Those are my forScore apps. I have a couple of games that I make on the side, but
very cool.
People will have to sleuth to figure that one out.
Yeah, I remember back in the days, people would spend like $100 or $200 on this fancy high-end like tuner and metronome, and now like our expensive Apple devices can now do this. It's kind of brilliant, how that's shifted.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, where can people find more information about forScore if they're so inclined?
The website is forscore.co. That's the best place if you want to learn about me. It's justinbianco.com. And I'm on Mastodon. You can go to justinbianco.com/hey, and you can find lots of links to my stuff. I'm on Mastodon a lot now. I like being a little more personal and a little more present. I hid behind the guise of the Royal We for a long time as the forScore. And now I'm just happy to be me and to share what I do and what I learn and to be available to people. So I encourage people to come and find me and say hello.
Awesome. And then, just download in the App Store to get started with forScore. Yep. And thank you so much for your time. I can't believe we haven't done this already. So thank you.
It's high time. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's my interview with Justin. Learn more about forScore over at forscore.co. My thanks again to Justin for his time recording this interview. My thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.